Imagine a being so powerful that a story written about it would cause the reader to go insane. Imagine that entity being so powerful that the story written about it is able to infect other stories and works of media. What if that entity, one that can influence the mind of artists and writers, could influence someone to make a video? One that would expose tens of millions of people to its presence. Good evening. My name is Dr. Lovell, and tonight we will be breaking down and declassifying the King in Yellow and how he tricked one man into exposing millions of people to this mimetic entity. The King in Yellow is a story that will drive the reader mad, give them the forbidden knowledge of the king's story. A story that, even glimpsing a few words from the second act, will doom you to this madness. Now, what happens when that story, when that being infects a video game? One that can draw players in, the call of the void, beckoning them towards a twisted fate. Whatever you do at the crossroads, don't turn left. Avery the Male is a YouTube channel that has posted 2 videos. One that's more or less irrelevant, and a second that's titled, Weird Book I Did Not Write. In the description of the video, Avery tells us that he found this laptop in a storage locker, and I have been using it as my daily laptop. It already had Minecraft installed, so I've been using that. The world I'm playing on already existed on the computer, but when I loaded it up, it looked totally normal. I just now found this area around 400 blocks away from my base. Watching the video, we see Avery walk down a staircase to a mine that he tells us that he did not build, where he shows us a book that, as the title suggests, is weird and he did not write. The book reads as follows: Whatever you do at the crossroads, don't turn left. Don't be fooled, it's listening. You can't outsmart it. It's listening to me. It's watching me. It isn't from this world. At the crossroads, don't turn left. At the crossroads, don't turn left. And it repeats a total of 7 times, the spelling somewhat erratic, as if it was written in a hurry, before ending in a series of numbers. As the video ends, Avery opens up his inventory, and for a moment, we get a glimpse of something. A random assortment of items, several of which shouldn't even be possible for Avery to get in survival. This might seem strange at first, but it'll seem even more bizarre whenever you realize that taking the first letter of each item and taking the number values from the light blocks, we get a string that looks like this. And then if we capitalize each of the letters with multiple blocks and add that string to the end of a Google Drive link, we get this: 2 videos and a PDF. The PDF, as we'll see in a minute, was not written by Avery, but explains that this is someone's documentation of a strange tunnel that they found in their Minecraft world. We know this isn't Avery since they say they're investigating a tunnel, and Avery was investigating a mine and book. But they also mentioned that this world came pre-installed with the game when they installed Minecraft, and that they'd been playing on the world for a while now before discovering what we're about to watch, confirming that this can't be Avery since he just started playing, and he hadn't even installed Minecraft. It had been on the laptop when he'd found it. For now, we'll call this person Light, and as we jump into the footage, you'll see why. Opening the first video, we see Light walking down a very familiar staircase, but as you'll notice, there's no book in the chest, and Light has a book and quill in his inventory, something to keep in mind for later. Light begins expanding his strip mine, and only makes it a few blocks before discovering a cave. Strangely, there seems to be almost a path of dim lighting leading up into the cave and out of view. As Light walks through the cave, he pauses and then continues walking. As he ventures farther into the cave, he notices a strange patch of moss blocks sitting in the corner of an otherwise barren tunnel. Now, if you're not wearing headphones, you might think that this is the first strange thing that Light has encountered so far, but if you were listening, it wasn't. As Light comes to what seems like a random stop in the middle of the cave, you can hear an extra set of footsteps on the stone. Light places a torch immediately after this, confirming that it's not some sort of audio desync. Someone's following him. Light continues down the cave, pausing randomly a few more times, confirming to us that somebody is definitely following him and that he definitely knows it. As he walks down the longest cave path that you've ever seen, what started as a few clumps of moss and strange bushes grows into forest-sized trees and tall caves made from tough, andesite, and other polished bricks. If the trees didn't make it clear enough already, this is not a normal Minecraft cave. As he wanders down the ever-expanding path, he arrives at a clearing and sees this. An impossibly large cavern, not only filled with moss, grass, and trees, but a strange lighting that seems to be emanating from nowhere. Light stares at this almost liminal grove of trees, taking in this cave that should most definitely be impossible. He climbs down the side of the cliff and into the cavern. The massive trees loom overhead, stacked on top of one another, growing impossibly tall. As Light walks through the grove, it becomes clear that the trees create a path that leads towards a cave on the opposite side of the cavern, beckoning him forward. As he approaches the tunnel, the trees grow even taller, built into these amalgamated rows with trunks made of stairs and wood. Clearly, someone had to have made this, but Light is supposed to be playing in a single-player world. Not only that, but he had been the one to install Minecraft onto this computer. How could somebody else have played on this world? We'll get to that in 1 second, but first, we need to watch Light walk down the hallway, because this is where things start to take a dark turn. As he enters the tunnel, he no longer hides the fact that he knows somebody's watching him. Every few steps he stops, listening for footsteps and turning to see if anyone's behind him. He walks back to the entrance, pressing a few buttons, and then walks down the hallway, still stopping every few seconds to turn around and look. The 5th time he turns around, he stops dead. Most normal people probably wouldn't even notice anything, but Light sees a tiny strip of darkness down at the beginning of the cave. One of the pairs of torches on the wall has disappeared. He walks farther forward, still checking behind him, until he stops again. A second pair of torches had disappeared, and the darkness is growing larger. "I'm not afraid of torches turning off," he announces in chat. He continues further. "I don't know what kind of practical joke this is, but I already heard you in the cave." I'm not scared of a game. Now, if you're anything like me, that was the first time in your life that a Minecraft video has genuinely scared you, but let me explain exactly why you should be even more afraid. Let's recap what's happened so far. Light, presumably, buys Minecraft, and then when he installs the game, this world came pre-built with it. Light plays on this world for a while before discovering a strange cavern near his mine. He explores it, realizing that somebody is following him in what should be a single-player game. He gets to a tunnel, all of the lights go out, and he hears that. Now, there will be more evidence of this later, but if you're at all familiar with the King in Yellow, you might already see some similarities. As I mentioned earlier, the King in Yellow is a being so powerful that a mere play written about him will drive anyone who reads it insane, and if you're a well-cultured horror enjoyer, you'll know that this play can
infect other stories around it, eventually changing art, people, and the world as a whole.
Now, The King in Yellow was originally published in 1895, but if we apply the concepts of the King to the modern day, it becomes even more horrifying. The King is already scary because his influence can extend through stories and art, corrupting them into madness. That was in the 18th century. In the modern age, a mimetic entity that can install itself into your computer as a save in your Minecraft game means that effectively nothing is safe. Light, as far as we know, didn't have to download anything strange, didn't have to go anywhere or talk to anyone. He just installed Minecraft, and this world was there. One that's inhabited by something that can clearly control the game beyond its normal bounds. The worst part of all of this, as we'll see, is that the thing that makes the King the most dangerous isn't how widespread his influence be, not how he can install himself into your computer, it's how he works. He's a cognito hazard. Knowing him is to know madness, and as we've seen time and time again from stories like Lovecraft to internet horror like Mother Horseeyes, once we get a glimpse, we can't stop looking. We have to know what's on the other side. We have to know what things are and where they come from. Curiosity killed the cat, and all too often we forget just how literal metaphors can be. What did Pompeii expect to find on the other side of the curtain? What did Light expect to find at the bottom of the cave? I've jumped ahead a little bit, so you might be a tad confused, but as we continue through the first video, most of that should start to become clear. Light explains that he doesn't know why he jumped down the hole. I wasn't scared, but I felt compelled. I've never felt like that before in my life. That compulsion, the beckoning that Light is talking about, is important, but we'll get to that. Light announces that he has to keep moving, and he dives back into the water. The shaft he swims into opens into a tunnel system, and Light chooses to go left. He emerges in another impossibly large cave, this one sure to trigger both your thalassophobia and trypophobia. Swimming to the surface to catch his breath, he hears it. As Light hides, we hear whatever is following him drift past, the whispers fading off into the distance. Light emerges from the ceiling and drops back down into the water. He swims by the caves, searching for any signal or marking of where to go, using doors and torches to breathe. What now? Eventually, he picks a cave and swims into it. Coming across another split, he makes another left, continuing down the tunnel, further and further. As he continues, the tunnel just keeps going. Until finally, he sees this. A second cavern grotto, this time even bigger than the first, completely filled in with a dense forest of strange trees. The cave roof is once again impossibly lit, creating a strange, liminal feeling of an otherworldly place. Looking up confirms that this cave is indeed too big to actually be underground, the roof having a large crack and revealing the moon night above. Light looks around for a minute and then decides that it's time to set a trap. He plugs the hole in the center of the lake where he came from, filling it with several layers of blocks. He announces in chat that whatever is following him will have to get through the blocks, but to be extra safe, he sets a much smarter trap. He cuts down a few trees and crafts a hopper, explaining that whatever it is might be able to replace the blocks in the center, but it wouldn't be able to avoid loading the chunks. So he sets his render distance down to 4 chunks, fills the hopper with items, explaining that he'll unload the chunk before all of the items can funnel into the chest, and so when he gets back, there should still be some items left. As he's doing this, he hops around and places some random blocks, and the only thing I can think that he's doing here is just making cover in case whatever it is can see him, because the only block here that matters is this block of dirt. Because as Light runs off to explore, he places a grass block from his inventory next to that dirt block, not saying anything but secretly setting a second trap. He wanders off into the forest, his trap set. Whoever or whatever it is that's following him might be able to break and place blocks. I mean, he's exploring an enormous cave system that's impossible to exist naturally. It had to be built by something. Not only that, but whatever this thing is has already shown that it can snap torches out of existence, so there's no reason to think it couldn't do the same with regular blocks too. But, as he explained, It can't move through a Minecraft chunk without loading it, so by filling a hopper with blocks and by setting his render distance low, he would de-render the hopper, leaving the items inside. That way, when he returns, there should still be items left in the hopper. If there aren't, he knows that something came through, causing the hopper to load and the items to transfer into the chest. Light explores this massive grotto. The low render distance, coupled with everything looking the same, making the forest look almost endless. He wanders farther and farther. Absolutely nothing in sight. Eventually, he comes to a stop, explaining to us how we haven't been paying nearly enough attention. Weird, that's the third sign we've seen so far. And by some miracle, he's right. Light spotted 3 signs that just barely entered the corner of his screen for a moment as he walked through the forest. He explains that they're all pointing in the same direction. If you draw a horizontal line out from each sign, they will intersect on one point. So after making cakewalk out of a puzzle so abstract that it was literally 3 blank signs hidden in a forest, Light heads back to his trap. He digs up his hopper, only to find it still filled with items. Nothing was here. He swims down to double check on the hole in the middle of the pond and, verifying that it's still plugged, heads back to land. Whatever was following him must have been thrown off his scent. But then this happens. Something else is here. I don't know if it can hear me, but I'm not taking any chances. And if you look through the footage, you'll see it. I mentioned that Light set a second trap. He hadn't just placed the hopper, he'd placed a block of dirt as well. And then he placed a block of grass next to that block of dirt. And for the same reasons that the hopper trap works, that grass could not have spread to the dirt block while Light was out exploring, unless something else had loaded the chunk. It was here. I'm not scared, but my gut says to keep moving. Maybe I am scared.
Faintly, call.
As Light searches the grotto, he finally finds it. An entrance to a tunnel. One that Light makes sure to patch up before leaving and wandering out into a maze. It'll take Light a second to pass through this area, so let's review what we know again. Whatever this entity is following Light, pushing him farther down into wherever we are. It's able to control the game to cause it to act in ways it shouldn't be able to. Endless caves, strange noises, and something that's smart enough to recognize a hopper trap and replace the items before it left the area. Clearly, whatever this thing is smart, and while Light may be smarter, he's just barely staying a step ahead. Navigating through the maze, Light emerges in yet another impossibly large cavern, lit with the strange, uncanny glow. On the top wall of the cave, we see a block of text, and while it takes Light 20 minutes to solve this with pen and paper, I'll try to keep the explanation short. Here is the string of text on the wall. If we run it through a Visionaire Cipher solver, the best result we get is CIP-BSA. It isn't much, but we can basically see the words ancient, men, and ash, and a couple of smaller words, so this is our best place to start. So if we start with the key CIP-BSA, that means our key length is going to be 6. So we'll break the cipher text into 6 columns, with each letter going into columns 1 through 6 based on which position they were in the line. That gives us this. Now, to solve for this, we need to treat each of these columns like a Caesar cipher. To match with our starting keyword, we'll use each letter's corresponding number value, A to Z, 1 to 26, and how many shifts it is away from the original values of A to Z. So for column 1, which is C, we'll shift it over 2 since C is 2 steps away from the letter A. For column 2, which is I, we'll shift it over 8. Column 3 will be 15, column 4 will be 1, column 5 will be 14, and column 6 will be 0. So our new columns look like this. Now, if we assemble this as is, we'll get the same text we got before, since this is just solving for CIP-BSA the long way. What we need to do is figure out which part of our key is wrong. Going off the clearest word we can see, ancient, the spelling error falls in column 4 of our written out version. Starting from there, we can try shifting column 4 to other values to see if we get something more legible. And sure enough, if we shift column 4 by 15 instead of 1, we get this. This is much more readable. Just adding spaces gives us this, and now we can start to see the formations of a sentence. If we correct all of the spelling errors, we can see that we're almost there. But something we need to pay attention to here is the spelling errors. For some reason, it seems like letters that are vaguely similar, especially when written out in Minecraft blocks, are more or less swapped out at random through this coded message. That's why beneath is spelled with an M instead of a B, and the is spelled with an S instead of an H, because the encoded versions of those letters look very similar. Basically, this means we need to create groups of similar letters, go back to the cipher solver, and manually try swapping out all of the letters until we get something a little more clear. So our new encrypted text should look more like this, even though it's written like this on the wall. Translating this new version gives us, beneath the sky of melting gold, ancient echoes of a shepherd's, and then gibberish before ending with, anyone goes is unseen truth, all but foe. Now, because this is clearly a poem, something that Light will confirm for us here in a minute, we can assume that the word at the end of line 2 is mold so that the rhyme fits, but the third line of the poem seems to still be encoded. However, if you take the original version of this portion of code that isn't translated, and you put that through the decoder by itself with the same keyword, you get this. Or an old decay is left. So putting our whole poem together, we get, beneath the sky of melting gold, ancient echoes of a shepherd's mold. An old decay, if left anyone goes, Is unseen truth all but foes? Now, it took me about 5 hours and an automated Cipher solver for me to decode this poem. Light figures this out in 17 minutes with a pen and paper. This man is a god. But we'll wait a minute to analyze that poem because Light, satisfied with the demonstration of his cryptography skills, chooses to ignore the combination lock door and simply mine through it, finding himself in the largest cavern yet. This one filled with a hauntingly abandoned village. As Light explores, he finds empty house after empty house. Empty room after empty room. It seems like the only things this village holds are cobwebs and yellow carpet. Light checks the fountain in the center of the village. Nothing. He checks more houses. Nothing. It seems like he might have reached an impasse. Out of desperation, Light pillars into the air, looking for anything even slightly noteworthy. And then he sees it. In the corner, a tiny house sits hidden in the shadows, its stone blocks blending into the cave wall. Light approaches. Nothing about the house seems special. Same yellow carpet, same yellow wood, same cobwebs. Light is desperate to find anything though. He flips the trapdoors back and forth, breaks a clay pot in the corner. He even towers up to check the few barrels used as decoration for the house. Nothing. He checks up the ladder. Nothing. At this point, Light is considering tearing the whole building down block by block, and then he finds it. The library. I hate it here. These idiots are insufferable. They think that devotion will save them. Rest assured, it will not. Not that it'll do them any good to believe that anyways. The ones who realized it pretend that they didn't, but it doesn't help that there are some who truly believe they'll be saved. The king is coming my ass. If anything, I wager that their king is already here. It's watching me write this. I don't particularly care. I just want to be done with this. The sooner I can leave, the better. He's arrived. I don't know why anyone is surprised to find that out. This is exactly what they were hoping for. I'm going. I'm leaving this here in the rare case that someone finds it. If you have found it, I implore you, turn back. Disconnect. Forget about this world. It is not for you. If you've come here, you must be curious. I know you must want to continue onward, so I know this is a heavy ask, but please do not go any further. For your own good, do not. Light looks around for a few minutes before miraculously finding a set of doors. The doors lead down a set of stairs and into another hallway. The 7th hallway. whatever you do at the crossroads, don't turn left. Don't be fooled. It's listening. You can't outsmart it. It's listening to me. It's watching me. It isn't from this world. At the crossroads, don't turn left. 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 The King in Yellow is a mimetic entity. Knowing it, seeing it, is to be infected. This footage ends with Light having seen something, either the king himself or some facsimile of it. And not only did he see it, but he saw it twice. That footage was edited by Light. He's the one who censored whatever was behind those doors. He saw what was behind the curtain. He peered through the veil and suddenly understood what he shouldn't. Knew the forbidden. The king isn't dangerous because of his influence. He's dangerous because of human nature. Our curiosity, our desire to know more, the urge to find out what's behind the curtain, what's on the other side of the interface, what's behind the bar. We as humans have an innate desire to know. And the king simply wants to give us the answer. Let's go back to the poem. Beneath the sky of melting gold, ancient echoes of a shepherd's mold. In old decay, if left anyone goes, is unseen truth all but foes. Beneath the sky of melting gold sounds like a description of Carcosa, a mysterious city from the King in Yellow play, but one that we know very little about. From what we do know, it's a land with two suns, said to be stranger than a night where black stars rise. It's a strange and otherworldly place, probably one with some sort of supernatural properties, and is likely the land inhabited by the king. Ancient Echoes of a Shepherd's Mold is interesting, one because Echoes is spelt wrong, missing an E, and we're currently assuming that the last two letters of the line read mold. Because of this, it's sort of hard to speculate what it might mean. However, the idea of ancient echoes or old memories being guided or molded by a king or shepherd definitely would fit in with what we understand about the king. An old decay, if left anyone goes, seems like a warning to those who enter. If anyone goes left, they will encounter the old decay, or whatever it was that Light saw behind the door. The final line, is unseen truth all but foe, is an interesting one because the idea of an unseen truth is almost a perfect description of the king. He doesn't grant you infinite knowledge of the universe, he gives you the exact knowledge that will cause your mind to snap. But the all but foe line is a bit ambiguous, maybe implying that the knowledge that the king promises is fake, or that whatever Light saw at the end of the crossroads wasn't the true king but a fake one. Another interesting thing that I haven't mentioned yet is Light's real name. Remember, I'm just calling him Light to keep him separate from Avery, but for a split second in the footage, the censor bar over the chat slips up and reveals Light's in-game name, Durlord. I have no idea what this means, why it's important, or why Light censored it to begin with, but it's strange. Another strange note is at the end of the second video, if you take Light's inventory and apply the same method we did back in Avery's video, we get a text that looks like this. If we decrypt that as a Caesar cipher, it translates to the nameless yellow sign brother. Obviously, this is a reference to the king. I'm not sure why Q would be used here outside of the fact that in Japanese, Q is pronounced the same way as the number 9, which is considered unlucky. I don't know how that would be relevant, but that's all I've got. The capitalized letters come out to nothing, and the yellow sign, while being something that we do know a bit about, doesn't exactly help us here. The yellow sign is a symbol that often shows up to people about to have an encounter with the king. It serves almost as a warning sign that the king is coming, so maybe it's meant to be a warning to Avery or to us that Light himself is the yellow sign and our warning to not continue, but I'm not really sure if that makes any sense. Another thing that we have to consider is that the King in Yellow is not the exclusive entity we have to consider here. A group known as the Brotherhood of the Yellow Sign is a cult dedicated to the worship of a being known as Kyphxr the Unspeakable. Kyphxr is said to be the god of shepherds, one of the great old ones and the half-brother of Cthulhu. Kyphxr is an amorphous octopoid being far larger than any natural creature, but many believe Kyphxr to be one of the names of the King in Yellow. So what we're dealing with here could be the King in Yellow himself, but it also could be the cult trying in some way to summon the king into this world. There's something else that you may have noticed if you were paying close attention. When Light ran away from whatever was behind the yellow doors, he emerged back in his mind, but not only does he emerge back in his mind, he breaks through the exact spot in the wall where he had initially entered. And if we go back and look at the footage, we know that it can't be the same cave passage that he first entered through, since we can see ores, andesite, and other stone types all over the cave, something that Light specifically pointed out wasn't there when he first entered. What I think this means is that Light is not in his original mind. It's a recreation made by the king, one located in a different part of the world. That would make sense as to how Avery was able to play on the world for a little before discovering the mine. If he had started from the same point that Light did, Light presumably had some sort of basin set up outside of this mine, but if this isn't actually the original mine, it means Avery would have been able to play for a bit before discovering this area around 400 blocks away from his base. Now, another thing I'd like to go over in more depth is the actual effects of the king himself. See, it's a common misconception that the king will make you flat out insane, and while that is possible, the effects of the king seem to fall on more of a spectrum based on the mental fortitude of the individual being affected. If someone who is already suffering from some sort of mental illness, or even just someone in a bad mental state has a run-in with the king, it can most definitely lead to outright insanity. In fact, in most instances of this, it is not uncommon that the affected person begins acting as a direct agent of the king. But whenever this affected person is of a sound mind, the effects seem to be much more subtle and calculated. To illustrate this, we'll look at the story of Boris, an artist who created a new element and the perfect ingredient to unravel his entire life. The account begins as follows. Although I knew nothing of chemistry, I listened, fascinated. He picked up an Easter lily, which Genevieve had brought that morning from Notre Dame, and dropped it into the basin. Instantly, the liquid lost its crystalline clearness. For a second, the lily was enveloped in a milky white foam which disappeared, leaving the fluid opalescent. Changing tints of orange and crimson played over the surface, and then what seemed to be a ray of pure sunlight struck through from the bottom where the lily lay resting. At the same instant, he plunged his hand into the basin and drew out the flower. There is no danger, he explained, if you choose the right moment. That golden ray is the signal. He held the lily towards me, and I took it in my hand. It had turned to stone, to the purest marble. You see, he said, it is without a flaw. What sculptor could reproduce it? The marble was white as snow, but in its depths, the veins of the lily were tinged with palest azure, and a faint flush lingered deep in its heart. Don't ask me the reason of that, he smiled, noticing my wonder. I have no idea why the veins and heart are tinted, but they always are. Yesterday I tried one of Genevieve's goldfish. There it is. The fish looked as if sculpted from marble, but if you held it to the light, the stone was beautifully veined with a faint blue, and from somewhere within came a rosy light like the tint which slumbers in an opal. I looked into the basin. Once more, it seemed filled with the clearest crystal. This account, being told by a man named Alec, is the beginning of Boris's story. See, the person speaking to Alec here is Boris. The element he discovered is this anomalous liquid that will turn any living thing inside of it to stone. You might not see what this has to do with the king's influence, but that's the sort of spectrum I was talking about earlier. See, Boris is of a sound mind, and while we'll come to find out that he has had an encounter with the King in Yellow, it hasn't completely unraveled his sanity. What it has done is given him knowledge, a forbidden knowledge of how to petrify the living into stone. As Alec goes on to tell Boris, the lily had been fresh and sweet before he destroyed it. Do you think I destroyed it? Boris asked gravely. Destroyed, preserved, how can we tell? The king doesn't always corrupt someone completely, turning them into a rambling, crazed shell of a human being. Most often, he will give them just enough knowledge that it'll create a butterfly effect that will ultimately enact another plan. As we continue to follow Boris's story, we'll see how this plan begins to unfold. Now, the third person that we're about to be introduced to is Genevieve, and the background that you need to know is that Boris, Alec, and Genevieve have all been friends for a long while and are sort of in a weird love triangle. Boris and Genevieve live together in this sort of hotel that Boris owns, and we find out at some point that in the past, Genevieve had ultimately decided that she cared for Alec, but she loved Boris. And while Alec had always been accepting and understanding of that, he still undeniably has feelings for her. Despite this, the three of them are good friends and spend a lot of time together. Boris announces to Alec that he will make no use of this new discovery beyond satisfying his own curiosity. It would be rather a blow to sculpturing, would it not? We painters lose more than we ever gain by photography. Boris nods his head in agreement. This new vicious discovery would corrupt the world of art. No, I shall never confide the secret to anyone, he said slowly. I'm almost frightened when I think what I have found. Scientists would go mad over the discovery. It was so simple, too. It discovered itself. When I think of the formula and that new element precipitated in its metallic scales, Alec cuts him off to ask what he's going to name the new element, to which Boris explains that he hasn't thought of a name and probably never will. There are enough precious metals now in the world to cut throats over. So, we know that Boris has discovered some kind of new element, and through some alchemical process has found a way to turn it into a liquid which will turn living things into marble. Not only that, but he says that the formula is so easy, so simple, that he's baffled that the scientific community hasn't already made the discovery themselves. This is, again, a small glimpse of the king's influence. The reason that this formula, this element, came so naturally to Boris isn't because it's simple and everyone should have found it by now. It's because he had knowledge that was given to him. But we'll need to keep reading to find out how. Alec is a painter and Boris is a sculptor, and Alec explains to us that he had been doing some interior painting for Genevieve, and so on top of the normal time the trio had spent together, Alec was spending extra time alone by himself in the house. One of the rooms of this house is a sort of studio that Boris and Alec decorated together, sculptures and paintings decorating a large room with the square pool in the center. As Alec wanders into the studio a few days later, he finds Boris, who explains that the pool is filled with his new anomalous liquid. "In heaven's name, why do you keep a small lake of that gruesome stuff here of all places?" Alec demands. "I want to experiment on something large," replied Boris. So it seems that despite Boris's recognition that whatever this stuff is dangerous and probably shouldn't be messed with, he's decided to make his experiments even bigger. What started as a bowl of this liquid was now an entire swimming pool, more than capable of holding an entire person. And while Boris assures Alec that he has no ideas like that in mind, he explains that he does have a very large rabbit that he wants to turn into marble. Now, something I didn't mention earlier is that when Genevieve first came home, back on the first day that Boris had been showing Alec how the liquid could turn a goldfish to stone, she'd been acting a little bit strange. Nothing too noticeable, but she was slightly irritable when she arrives, and then she goes and gets changed, and when she comes back she apologizes, saying that she thought she had a headache, but it's gone now, and she returns to acting like her usual self. Well, the day after Boris fills an entire pool with the liquid, we see another instance of Genevieve acting strangely. This time, Alec accidentally falls asleep in one of the rooms of the house, and he wakes up in the middle of the night. As he does, he hears something coming from the other room and, going to investigate, finds Genevieve crying. She explains that she tripped on one of the statues and that she thinks she sprained her ankle. To which Alec calls for the doctor, and when he arrives, Alec goes home for the night. The next day, Boris explains that she did sprain her ankle, but the sprain itself was so minor that it's basically already healed. What's troubling is the fact that Genevieve has a very high fever. He explains that she has actually been a little lightheaded at intervals all night. She keeps saying her heart's broken and she wants to die. Now, we're still not sure how, but Genevieve is now being affected by the King's influence too. Again, she hasn't gone crazy, but she has become a piece on a very large, very long chessboard. With nothing better to do, Alec and Boris return to the pool of liquid. Boris plucks a solitary goldfish, squirming and twisting out of its globe. "We'll send this one in after the other, wherever that is," he said. There was feverish excitement in his voice. He dropped the creature in. Falling, its scales flashed with a hot orange gleam in its angry twisting and contortions. The moment it struck the liquid, it became rigid and sank heavily to the bottom. Then came the milky foam, the splendid hues radiating on the surface, and then the shaft of pure serene light broke through from the seemingly infinite depths. Boris plunged his hand in and drew out the exquisite marble thing, blue-veined, rose-tinted, and glistening with opalescent drops. Nothing would do but to try the experiment on the white rabbit then and there. I was willing that Boris should find a distraction from his cares, but I hated to see the life go out of a warm, living creature, and I declined to be present. Picking up a book at random, I sat down in the studio to read. Alas, I had found The King in Yellow. And now we see it. Boris had a copy of The King in Yellow in his studio. Now, it's never made clear whether Genevieve actually read the play. Clearly she's being affected by it, but as we'll see, Boris is the primary target of that effect. So we can pretty safely assume that Boris has read the play and, studying its secrets, developed the formula for this mysterious liquid. And regardless of whether or not she read the play, Genevieve is clearly being influenced by the king as well, as she's still passed out with a high fever. At almost the exact moment that Alec finishes reading the play, Boris and their other friend Jack return with a large marble rabbit. As they do, they all hear a scream. They rush to the sick room to find Genevieve sitting bolt upright with crimson cheeks and glittering eyes, babbling incessantly and resisting Boris's gentle restraint. He calls Alec over to help. At my first touch, she sighed and sank back, closing her eyes, and then, as we still bent above her, she opened them again, looked straight into Boris's face, and told her secret. Genevieve confesses her love for Alec. Amazed and dumb, I bowed my head, while my face burned like a live coal, and the blood surged in my ears, stupefying me with its clamor. Incapable of movement, incapable of speech, I listened to her feverish words in an agony of shame and sorrow. I could not silence her. I could not look at Boris. Then, I felt an arm upon my shoulder, and Boris turned a bloodless face to mine. "It's not your fault, Alec. Don't grieve if she loves you," he starts saying, but the words get caught in his throat. As the doctor arrives, I seized Jack Scott and hurried him to the street, saying Boris would rather be alone. As Jack and Alec return to their apartments, a sickness begins to fall over Alec, and so Jack sends for the doctor again. Alec is sick for over a week, completely bedridden. In this time, he thinks about the Lake of Hali, thin and blank, without a ripple or wind to stir it, and he sees the towers of Carcosa behind the moon. Aldebaran, the Hyades, Alar, Hastur, glided through the cloud rifts which fluttered and flapped as they passed like the scalloped tatters of the King in Yellow. He's enamored by these thoughts of the King in Carcosa, Hastur, and the Lake of Hali, but he says one sane thought persisted. It never wavered, no matter what else was going on in my disordered mind, that my chief reason for existing was to meet some requirement of Boris and Genevieve. And here's where we get to another common misconception of the Yellow King. The king is not all-powerful, or if he is, he doesn't demonstrate it with an outright authority. As we're about to see with Alec, it is possible to escape the king's grasp. It is possible to sever his influence, but you need to resist the temptation. Even in this delirious state, Alec is able to come to a conclusion. A resolute and decisive conclusion that once he is well, he will visit Boris and Genevieve one last time, and then he will disappear from their lives forever. Eventually, Alec makes a recovery. After days and days of being too weak to speak or move, he finally gains the strength to call Jack over. "Jack, I want Boris at once, and take my dearest greeting to Genevieve." And Jack reveals the harrowing truth. That day, when I left you in the doctor's care and came back to Boris, I found him working in his studio. Genevieve, he said, was sleeping under the influence of drugs. She had been quite out of her mind, he said. He kept on working, not talking anymore, and I watched him. Well, he worked and I watched him in silence, and we went on that way until nearly midnight. Then we heard the door open and shut sharply in a swift rush in the next room. Boris sprang through the doorway and I followed, but we were too late. She lay at the bottom of the pool, her hands across her breasts. Then Boris shot himself through the heart. Jack stopped speaking. Drops of sweat stood under his eyes, and his thin cheeks twitched. Jack explains how he took Boris to his room and then, returning to the studio, let the hellish fluid out of the pool, dumped all of the beakers and test tubes, shattered the empty containers, and melted them in a coal scuttle. He took every paper, every letter, every book, any recorded evidence of what the liquid was or how to create it, and destroyed it all. Only after that did he dare call the doctor. He explains that the doctor is a good man, an understanding man, and helped Jack keep the situation from the public. They buried Boris in the little cemetery of the Cipher, and the doctor gave his certificate of heart disease, asking no questions. With Alec finally awake, they read Boris's will. He, of course, leaves everything to Genevieve, and in the event that something should happen to her, everything is to go to Alec. Later that evening, Alec returns to the house that just weeks ago he knew so well. Everything was in order, but the silence was terrible. Though I went twice to the door of the marble room, I could not force myself to enter. It was beyond my strength. A small lace handkerchief lay on the keys of the spinet, and I turned away, choking. It was plain that I could not stay, so I locked every door, every window, and the 3 front and back gates, and went away. Alec would spend 2 years traveling the country, a wayward soul with no real aims or goals. He keeps in touch with Jack through letters, and while they don't talk about Boris and Genevieve at first, gradually they creep into the conversations. After about 2 years, Alec explains that Jack sent him a very bizarre letter that says, "I have not a care of my own, but I am more restless than if I had. I am unable to shake off a strange anxiety about you. It is not apprehension, it is rather a breathless expectancy. Of what? God knows. I can only say it is wearing me out. Nights I dream always of you and Boris. I can never recall anything afterwards, but I wake in the morning with my heart beating, and all day that excitement increases until I fall asleep at night to recall the same experience. I am quite exhausted by it and have determined to break up this morbid condition. I must see you." Alec and Jack meet up, and Alec ultimately decides that enough time has passed and he's ready to return to Boris's house. His house. Instead of the agitation I had feared, I found myself able to paint there tranquilly. I visited all the rooms, all but one. I could not bring myself to enter the marble studio where Genevieve lay, and yet I felt the longing growing daily to look upon her face, to kneel beside her. One April afternoon, I lay dreaming in the smoking room, just as I had lain 2 years before. I turned my eyes to the spinet. Every yellow key seemed eloquent of her caressing hand, and I rose, drawn by the strength of my life's passion, to the sealed door of the marble room. The heavy doors swung inward under my trembling hands. Sunlight poured through the window, tipping with gold the wings of Cupid, and lingered like a nimbus over the brows of the Madonna statue Boris had sculpted years earlier. Her tender face bent in compassion over a marble form so exquisitely pure that I knelt and signed myself. Genevieve lay in the shadow under the Madonna, and yet through her white arms I saw the pale azure vein, and beneath her softly clasped hands the folds of her dress were tinged with rose, as if from some faint, warm light within her breast. Bending, with a breaking heart, I touched the marble drapery with my lips, then crept back into the silent house. A maid came and brought me a letter, and I sat down in the little conservatory to read it, but seeing the girl lingering, I asked her what she wanted. She stammered something about a white rabbit that had been caught in the house and asked what should be done with it. I told her to let it loose in the walled garden behind the house and opened the letter. The letter was from Jack, but so incoherent that it was nothing but a series of prayers to me not to leave the house until he could get back. He would not tell me why. He could explain nothing, but he was sure that I must not leave the house. As I finished reading, I raised my eyes and saw the same maidservant standing in the doorway, holding a glass dish in which 2 goldfish were swimming. "Put them back into the tank and tell me what you mean by interrupting me," I said. With a half-suppressed whimper, she emptied the water and fish into an aquarium at the end of the conservatory, and then turning to me, said people were playing tricks on her. The marble rabbit had been stolen and a live one had been brought into the house. The 2 beautiful marble fish were gone, and she had just found those common live things flopping on the dining room floor. I reassured her and sent her away. As I went into the studio, I picked up the marble lily, but the flower I lifted from the table was fresh and fragile and filled the air with perfume. Then, suddenly, I comprehended and sprang through the hallway to the marble room. The doors flew open, the sunlight streamed into my face, and through it, in a heavenly glory, the Madonna smiled as Genevieve lifted her flushed face from her marble couch and opened her sleepy eyes. The story of Boris the Sculptor is both a tragic and heartwarming one. While the king was successfully able to exert his control over Boris, with him giving in to the temptation of testing the strange liquid more and more, Alec was able to resist that temptation. Even while deathly ill, he resolved that he would leave Boris and Genevieve forever as to not become a wedge in their relationship. He was prepared to give up his friendship with his 2 closest friends because he thought ultimately it would make them happy. By fighting through these temptations, by deciding that he wouldn't give in, wouldn't try and take Genevieve from Boris, even though she had proclaimed her love for him, he was able to escape the king's grasp and ultimately live a life with Genevieve because of that. The King in Yellow isn't some all-powerful entity that looking at him will cause your mind to snap and for you to go insane. Most often, he will drive you to madness through your own choices, your own actions, simply by dangling the temptation in front of you. The knowledge that the king gives you doesn't inherently corrupt your mind. It doesn't necessarily break who you are at your core. What it does is set you on a path to reach that point, and then he'll watch you struggle, just to see what happens. So then, the question for us is, what knowledge did the king give to light? Now, in all honesty, we simply don't have a concrete answer to this question yet. What we do know is that if you decode the numbers at the end of the book, each number corresponding to a letter from an item in Light's inventory, we get this. Run, Avery, it's here. Clearly, the king gave Light some knowledge of the future, enough to see Avery and know that Avery would find this laptop, find this world, but beyond that, we have no way of knowing what the full plan is. As we saw with Boris and Alec, the king's influence most often leads to long, drawn-out butterfly effects that are impossible to see before they happen. We may never know exactly what Light learned from the king, but what we do know is that this probably isn't over. Now, there's one last important thing that I haven't talked about yet. Wifies. Wifies is a YouTuber who created the video searching for a world that doesn't exist in 2025. A video about Avery, Light, and this bizarre story of the king. In fact, it was through Wifies' video that I, and along with millions and millions of other people, learned this story of Light and Avery for the first time. But it wasn't my first time hearing of the king. Documentary Q is a Japanese occult TV network founded on the idea of archiving the anomalous. A common phenomenon they encountered throughout the process of acquiring these videos was that of the implied lie, an instance where someone lies about something, often to garner money or attention, only to find out that the lie was true all along. A movie rental clerk spreads a fake rumor that if you watch one of his films, you'll die. He claims he wrote the message on the tape to increase sales, but when the Q producer watches the movie, he dies. In another instance, a taxi driver makes up a fake story about how he drove ghosts to their final resting place in the woods in order to score a movie deal and earn an early retirement, only to find out years later that the location he thought was a patch of woods had been a graveyard all along. This all might seem random, but I promise there's a purpose. Remember the final message of Light's inventory? The nameless yellow sign brother, but the A is spelt with a Q, the Japanese word for 9, and a symbol of bad luck. What if it was never Light who decided to document his progress? What if it was never Avery who decided to make a video and upload it to YouTube? I mean, after all, how could a random series of blocks in the last few frames of Avery's video lead us to a Google Drive folder made by Light? What if Wifies never had the idea to make this video at all? What if, in actuality, he came into contact with the King in Yellow? Either the play, or the sign, or the king himself. But what if Wifies was influenced to make this video? A video that now has exposed almost 20 million people to the knowledge of the king. And as we establish, it's human nature to always need to know more, to always need to dig deeper. Simply giving us a compelling story only to censor the big reveal at the end is enough to make this video far more effective than any play could be. The play of The King in Yellow is broken into 2 acts, and while we don't know the contents for obvious reasons, the first act is reportedly normal, if a bit disturbing. Those who read it have been able to set the book down and stop, recognizing the danger they were in. But the second act is deadly. Even glimpsing the first few words of the second act of the play will fill you with an insatiable urge to continue reading, doing nothing else until you finish the story and then probably reading it again several times over. These YouTube videos seem to be almost a modern day equivalent of that. The 2 videos in the Google Drive, footage 1 and footage 2, being the new Act 1 and Act 2 of the Yellow King, and now Wifies has combined both acts together, creating an irresistible video designed to ensnare millions of people, forcing them to watch both parts at once. The scarier part, I think, is thinking about if this isn't the end, because in that case, what we just watched was Act 1, and now 17 million people want to know what's behind the bar. 17 million people now dying to watch Act 2. Like the book in the library suggested, people think knowledge will save them. People think knowing will protect them from the monsters in the dark. But what happens when all the monster wants is for you to know? Whatever you do at the Crossroads, don't turn left.
I'm home again. I thought that I could run away, run away. I had nothing more to say, more to say. I was pretty sure of myself. Gave me